Well, good morning. I was not going to shoot any video today because I've got some castings I need to finish out and some work that I actually need to do, real work. But I thought I'd show you a mistake. I knew I was going to do some casting yesterday and I was going to build some more Atlas parts, and I kind of got sidetracked. Here for the last, couple, 3 years, I've been building I've been gathering parts for a Steve Chastain based sand muller for conditioning sand. Now I had got around and built a sand fluffer a la old Foundry man and thought that was a pretty good idea. And the reality is, for my workflow and the way I like to cast, it doesn't work well for me in that condition. I just don't care for it that much. If you've got your sand conditioned and tempered and anything, and you just want to go in and kind of fluff it and put it back into your sand bin so it's ready for the next casting session, I think it works really well for that. The problem is, the way I like to cast is, as soon as I shake out a mold, I like to retemper that sand and get it back in the bin at least relatively ready to go. You know, I still sift the top, around my patterns and stuff, but I like it basically broken down, already tempered, to where all I've got to do is pull the lid off the bin and I can go to ramming molds. So it doesn't work well for me in that respect, because when you temper and then immediately try and run it through that little fluffer, why it tends to plug it up. And it's a combination of the way I work, how much I temper my sand, and my sand clay mixture, so it just doesn't work well for me in that respect. What I think I will probably do is eventually I'll change it over just to a push button switch. I'll add a screen on the bottom of it, and I'll use it just to sift sand on top of new molds. So if I'm working a mold, all I've got to do is pull it over and punch the button, and it'll sift my sand down through there and give me a nice fine sand on top of my patterns as I ram those up, or start the first layer as I start to ram that up. And I think it'll work well for that. But for me, I think I'm better served with a muller. Now, I'd previously built a muller and it worked okay. It did a okay job. I saw this Steve Chastain design and I think it's a better design, and I've been gathering parts. So I built the pattern for the gearbox, and his gearbox has got two halves to it, and it's a fairly substantial pattern. And I built a mold flask just for that. And yesterday, rather than casting some Atlas parts like I'd intended to, I thought, well, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can ram this up. And I've been hesitant to do it because I didn't know if my little Foundry had the capacity to do it. He stated that he thought it took about 25 to 30 pounds of aluminum to do that. Now, I've got one of these patterns that I tried to cast yesterday, and it was a failure from the aspect of producing a usable product. This is a pattern here, and this is a pretty substantial pattern, and this pattern could be finished out better than it is, and in all honesty, I'm kind of tired of screwing with it. I need 2 of these cast, and that's all this pattern will ever see. This is my disaster of a casting, and I shorted it. I'm going to throw this on the scale and see just exactly what this weighs. But there's several problems with that. I thought it might have filled when I poured it. And I knew it was short. But that's, part of the game. This is the pattern. This is the flask here. And this has got Steve Chastain style hardware on it. And this is a fairly substantial flask. And that's part of the reason I was hesitant to cast these. And molding flask wise, this is more than I can handle by myself, basically. Now, I rammed this up and did it yesterday. And even though I built it specifically for this pattern, I think I'm going to cut it down. Now, internal dimensions on it right now are about 28.5 by 23.5, and they're 8 3/4 inches tall with both the cope and the drag. I'm going to cut these down, or I'm going to cut this one down to 20 by 24, and that will be just barely big enough to cast this pattern. And I built this a little bit bigger initially because I intended to run sprues and risers on the outside, and then run runners around the outside of the pattern and gate it that way. This is one of those patterns, especially just 2-off. They don't have to be perfect patterns, but they've got to be usable patterns, and I think the best way to do it is I'm just going to pour directly into the center of the casting, which is what Chastain originally did. Well, he had problems with his gating system. I'm going to pour directly into the center of the casting, and we'll run some risers around the outer edges of it to make sure it fills. I didn't have enough aluminum was one of my problems. You know, my little flask would not. I had it filled as much as I could get it, and it doesn't have enough capacity, you know. So like I say, I'm going to measure this. I'm going to weigh this one that I did cast and see what this much of it weighs. I would speculate it's going to take another probably 10 pounds on top of that to completely fill. With me pouring directly into the center and running risers directly up out of the top of the rim of it, I don't need that extra space around it to run runners in. So I'm going to cut it down, like I say, just about 4 inches all the way around. Now, the problem with this flask, the problem with this pour, is this flask is too big and doesn't have enough rigidity for my setup. This uses virtually all the sand I had in my bin. There was probably a 5-gallon bucket worth left in the bottom of the sand bin, but so all of that sand had to be tempered perfect, which really wasn't an issue. When I poured it, I didn't bother to completely fill the top. And my son was out and about doing other things, so I didn't have him available to help me lift the cope off of it. And I ended up and ran a come along and ran it up to the top of my little overarms on the casting bench, and I got it lifted off and I got it set back in after I got the pattern pulled out. Now, I knew it was not going to be a good casting. I'd hoped it would be an acceptable casting. Molding flask wise, I've still got 7 or 8 of these flasks in different sizes. Originally, I set these up as snap flasks. There again, a la Steve Chastain. I've gone away from that. The way I cast it doesn't work well for me. I'm better off to have multiple smaller flasks dedicated to a match plate, or that I can grab for a loose pattern if I'm doing that. And that works better for me than trying to make 5 shaper guards in a day or something like that using a snap flask. They just didn't work well for me. For my setup, I had more problems with leakage on them. It's more of a hassle to weight them. You know, there's several things for the small Foundry that I don't think that's really an advantage that they're touted as an advantage. So I still got a couple of them that are set up as snap flasks. The most of them, I pulled that snap flask hardware off of there and just made them solid. You know, pulled the latch itself off and screwed them in tight. I keep these flasks around because they're either set up for specific things, or I've got match plates set up for them, and I really don't feel like reworking the match plates on them. I've got a couple of them in particular that are set up for match plates that I use quite often, so I'll keep them in their current configuration and use them. The hardware's too big and clunky. And like I say, the snap flask didn't work well for me. So that's just kind of a little update. That's my take on Foundry flasks. You know, I've talked about the old Foundry man style flasks in some of my other videos. I think that's a really good design for smaller flasks. You know, you get into the bigger flasks, I don't know. For the most part, I think it's still a good design, but they may be a little bit lighter duty once you get into the bigger flasks. So I've still got a match plate set up with this flask hardware on it, so I will keep it and use it for bigger flasks like this. But anyway, that's all I got going on today. I thought you'd find my failure a little bit interesting, and hopefully you find something you can use in your Foundry. And comments or suggestions, leave them in the comments section for me below. And as always, thanks for taking the time to watch.